My relationship with abroad in Japan didn't begin with a cinematic drone shot of rural Japan, or a perfectly timed dry joke delivered to camera. It began, strangely enough, on a podcast. My first real exposure to Chris Broad came through his debut appearance on my favourite podcast, Trash Taste, where his presence felt immediately different from the usual internet guest cameo. There was no performative loudness, no desperate need to dominate the conversation. Instead, there was this calm, almost disarmingly grounded energy. An English guy who had lived in Japan long enough to speak with authority, but also with humility, self-awareness, and a sharp sense of British humour. Of course, it didn't take long before curiosity did its thing. I searched him up and found Abroad in Japan, and that's where the real hook began to set in. What struck me immediately was how confidently unflashy his content felt. In an internet landscape overflowing with exaggerated thumbnails, forced enthusiasm, and superficial surface-level fun facts, his videos felt refreshingly composed, measured, intentional. The jokes landed not because they were loud or exaggerated, but because they were honest. The information stuck not because it was spoon-fed, but because it was embedded in an experience. I wasn't just learning about Japan, I was learning through someone who had lived there long enough to understand its contradictions, frustrations, wonders, and quiet rhythms. Some videos are overtly informative, deep dives into Japan's work culture, natural disasters, rural depopulation, or social etiquette. Others are framed as road trips, challenges, or quietly self-deprecating adventures. But no matter the format, there's always a balance being struck. Information anchored by personality, comedy grounded in lived-in reality, and as a long-time fan now, that balance is what keeps me coming back. Abroad in Japan never feels like it's chasing relevance or pandering to trends. It feels built on confidence. Confidence in storytelling, in pacing, and in the idea that learning doesn't need to be loud to be engaging. This video, therefore, isn't just about why the channel is popular or why Japan is so endlessly fascinating. It's about something subtler and far more enduring. What makes Abroad in Japan such remarkably effective edutainment, and why, long after his first Trash Taste appearance, the channel continues to feel essential rather than disposable. And for those very small few who came across this video by random chance, here's what you need to know about Chris Broad, the person behind the channel. At a glance, he is a British expatriate living in Japan who makes videos about travel, culture, and occasionally terrible ideas that seem reasonable right up until the moment they aren't. But that summary barely scratches the surface, because the appeal of Chris Broad has never rested on credentials alone. What defines him, what genuinely separates him from countless other creators operating in the same space, is how profoundly, unmistakably British his presence is. Affable, one might say. Not in a caricatured, novelty accent way, but in the deeply ingrained sensibilities that shape his humour, his restraint, and the way he reacts to the world around him. His videos don't erupt with exaggerated excitement, they simmer. They carry that dry, self-effacing tone that treats enthusiasm as something earned rather than having to be performed. This Britishness manifests most clearly in how he handles discomfort, both his own and that of the viewer. Where many creators might amplify culture shock for spectacle, Chris tends to absorb it, quietly, often turning awkwardness inward rather than outward. There is a constant undercurrent of bemused endurance in his work, a sense that no matter how inconvenient, confusing, or borderline miserable a situation can become, complaining loudly would somehow be worse than enduring it with sarcasm and a raised eyebrow. It's a sensibility rooted deeply in British humour, the idea that true comedy is found not in broadcasting suffering, but in understanding it. That same cultural lens is also what gives his storytelling its grounding. Chris Broad doesn't just position himself as an expert towering above the subject matter, nor does he play the clueless outsider forever baffled and wondered by Japan. Instead, he exists in a liminal space between the two, experienced enough to offer insight, yet self-aware enough to acknowledge his limits. That balance allows his commentary to feel observational rather than judgmental. Crucially, this very British reserve is what makes his educational content so entertainingly effective. Information arrives naturally, slipped into anecdotes and asides, never delivered with the tone of a lecture. Viewers learn about Japanese systems, norms, and unspoken rules almost accidentally because they're busy following a story or waiting for a punchline. It's education disguised as narrative. knowledge conveyed through patience and wit rather than urgency and volume. In a digital ecosystem that often rewards immediacy and exaggeration, Chris Broad's calm, deliberately paced approach feels almost defiant, and in that defiance lies a large part of why Abroad in Japan works so well. It trusts that quiet confidence, paired with sharp insight and distinctly British humour, is more than enough to hold any kind of audience's attention. While Chris Broad's personality may be the entry point, the true staying power of Abroad in Japan lies in how deliberately its information is constructed. This is not a channel built around dumping facts on screen or racing through bullet points masked as entertainment. Instead, education is almost always embedded within a story, one with momentum, stakes, and usually some looming sense that things are going to go wrong before they get better. Whether it's a multi-day journey across rural Japan, an ambitious challenge with entirely self-imposed rules, or an investigation into a quietly complex aspect of Japanese life, the structure remains consistent. Curiosity first, context second, insight earned rather than handed out. You don't press play because you want to learn, you press play because you want to see what unfolds. The learning simply arrives along the way. This narrative-forward approach is what separates the channel from more traditional informational content. Facts are rarely introduced in isolation, they are motivated by circumstance. A train delay becomes an entry point into Japan's transport culture. A failed plan opens the door for discussions about logistics, geography, or social expectations. Equally important is what the channel chooses not to do. There is very little reliance on shock value or artificial escalation or reaction. Japan is not framed as an exotic puzzle box to be decoded, nor as a flawless utopia to be admired from afar. Instead, it is presented as a real place, full of systems that function brilliantly in some contexts and maddeningly in others. This refusal to flatten the subject matter is key to the channel's edutainment success. By allowing Japan to exist in its contradictions, the content avoids propaganda and invites understanding instead. Education, therefore, becomes a process of exposure rather than persuasion. The pacing reinforces this philosophy. Unlike algorithm-chasing content creators that rush from beat to beat out of fear of losing attention, Abroad in Japan often allows moments to breathe. Long shots of landscapes, stretches of travel, and quiet reflections that are not treated as dead air, but as part of the experience. Ultimately, what makes the channel's edutainment so effective is how inseparable the education is from the journey itself. You don't feel like you've been taught, you feel like you've accompanied someone through an experience and walked away wiser for it. That distinction matters. In a sea of content designed to inform as quickly as possible, Abroad in Japan succeeds by doing the opposite, by slowing down, trusting its audience, and letting the story do what raw information alone never could. If Abroad in Japan often represents Chris Broad at his most measured and introspective, then Wacky Weekend is where that restraint is gleefully stress-tested. This recurring series thrives on contrast between planning and chaos, confidence and improvisation, and most importantly, between two fundamentally different comedic instincts colliding in real time. Pairing Chris with Connor Colquhoun creates a dynamic that feels less like a collaboration and more like a social experiment. What happens when dry British understatement is forced to keep pace with relentlessly chaotic Welsh enthusiasm? The result is edutainment at its most effective, messy, unpredictable, and effortlessly revealing. Connor, better known as CDawgVA, operates on a frequency that feels almost alien to Chris's default Abroad in Japan mode. Where Chris tends to calculate risk, Connor dives headfirst into it like the monkey he is, usually with misplaced confidence and absolute commitment to the bit. His humour is often louder, more physical, and unapologetically impulsive, built on escalation, absurdity, and the sheer audacity of poor decisions made with full sincerity. This is where Wacky Weekend earns its name. The humour doesn't arise from polished bits or pre-written jokes, but from the slow unravelling of plans under pressure. Chris's carefully laid expectations clash with Connor's chaotic energy, and comedy emerges in the gaps between intention and outcome. You can see it in Chris's expressions, the pauses, the sighs, the moments where he seems to reassess every decision that led him up to this very point. These reactions are funny, not because they're exaggerated, but because they're painfully authentic. British deadpan meets Welsh defiance, and neither fully comes out on top. The chaos forces both hosts, and therefore the audience, to engage more deeply with their surroundings. Cultural details, logistical challenges, and social nuances surface organically as plans derail and improvisation becomes necessary. Learning happens in real time, driven by necessity and comedy rather than design. It's the difference between explaining how something works and discovering how it doesn't when theory meets reality. What makes Wacky Weekend so effective and endlessly entertaining within the broader Abroad in Japan ecosystem is how it expands Chris Broad's persona without ever betraying it. He doesn't become louder or more exaggerated to match Connor's energy. Instead, his restraint sharpens with contrast, allowing humor to flourish through reaction rather than performance. The series proves that edutainment doesn't need consistency of tone, it needs chemistry, trust, camaraderie, and the willingness to let personalities clash naturally. In the end, Wacky Weekend feels like the purest expression of why Abroad in Japan works so well as edutainment. It reminds us that learning is often at its most engaging when control is surrendered just enough for chaos to sneak in through the back door. Where British meets Welsh, structure meets spontaneity, and somewhere in that collision, information becomes entertainingly unforgettable. What ultimately makes Abroad in Japan such effective edutainment isn't any single kind of format, collaborator, or viral moment, it's consistency of intent. Across 10 years of content, shifting algorithms in an ever-changing online landscape, Chris Broad has remained remarkably committed to the same core idea, that audiences don't need to be shouted at to stay engaged. Learning can be quiet, humor can be dry, insight can arrive slowly through experience rather than instruction. That philosophy runs through everything from solo travelogues to chaotic collaborations with the aforementioned CDawgVA. Looking back at my own entry point, discovering him through Trash Taste, it's striking how accurately that first impression holds up. The same measured storytelling, self-awareness, and understated wit that made him stand out in conversations are precisely what sustain his long-form work. Time has only refined those very instincts. That trust is perhaps the channel's greatest strength. Abroad in Japan never assumes ignorance, nor does it chase validation through spectacle. Instead, it invites viewers to observe, to sit in moments of discomfort or beauty, and to learn through proximity rather than instruction. Whether through Chris's distinctly British reserve or the chaotic chemistry of Wacky Weekend, education and entertainment remain inseparable, not balanced mechanically, but woven together through personality and 10 years of experience. In an era where edutainment often feels engineered, optimized, and painfully self-aware, Abroad in Japan succeeds by feeling human. Imperfect journeys, failed plans, quiet observations, and genuine reactions form a body of work that doesn't just inform, it resonates. And that's why, years after that first accidental introduction, the channel still feels less like something I consume and more like something I look forward to returning to.